You're listening to the John Moore Podcast from News Talk 1010.
Stephen MacKinnon is with us to talk about this commemoration of Operation Husky. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having us here.
Most people know all about the D-Day invasion. They've probably even maybe visited the site, and that history is indelible. And yet almost no one ever talks about Operation Husky.
That's exactly correct, and it's shocking, really. And I must confess, when I first heard about this project 4 years ago from my friend Steve Gregory, who's the initiator of this project, he was just telling me a story over dinner, and I was like, I didn't know this. I didn't know. I was clueless about this. 91% of Canadians have no knowledge of our participation in the liberation of Sicily and Italy. For most people, the beginning of our efforts in World War II began, as you said, Normandy and D-Day.
Well, spell it out in the broad strokes and the key date. I mean, everyone knows 6th of June, 1944. Tell us about Operation Husky.
So this is July 10th, 1943, so a good 11 months before D-Day. So this was the first really pushback into Europe, and it was a concerted effort between the British, led by Montgomery, the Americans with Patton, and Canada. And what actually happened is we landed on the beaches of Pequeno. The Canadians were to go through the middle, which was at that time deemed to be the sort of easiest part, and most of the fighting that we thought would be on the west and east coast. What happens is the Germans actually contracted and pushed inward. So the Canadians had to really do punch above their weight level to what they were expected to do. And they began this journey, if you will, for about 24 days through the hot, rugged countryside of Sicily, and pushed the Germans further back, and took town after town, surrendered and liberated them.
What was the reaction? I mean, when we were liberating Northern Europe, we were setting people free from the Nazis.
Exactly, same thing. The townspeople were thrilled that we were here. There were celebrations. They were just so happy to be out from underfoot, if you will. And we've had some reconnaissance people go over a couple of times and set up with each town that we're going to be in. And the response today has been overwhelming as well. These towns are planning festivals and their own special ceremonies as we approach each town, and our ranks swell. So, towards the end, hundreds of Canadians in our white shirts and our red hats and our flags coming into the town, and the townspeople will join us, and we'll do a ceremony at the center of each town every day, commemorating those soldiers that fell in or around that area. Do an official part with the mayor of each town, and then sort of have a little celebration with the townsfolk and the Canadians, and then we do that again the next day and over again until we sort of culminate towards the end in a town called Agira, where there's a Canadian cemetery with about 450 Canadians that are buried there. In total, in Operation Husky, 562 Canadians were lost over that 24 days, 2,300 wounded, 25,000 Canadians that actually landed that day on July 10th. So what we plan to do at the Canadian cemetery at Agira, is do a roll call for all those soldiers. We want to call out every soldier's name and have somebody represent them, be called, present. Later that night, we're going to rebroadcast or reenact a famous news piece that was done by Peter Stursberg of the CBC. He caught the recording of the 48th Highlanders and their pipe bands playing while battle was going on in the distance. So we have about 12 pipers and some drummers that are going to put on a concert that night. We're going to retape it again and hopefully get it out to Canadians back here 7 years later.
My guest is Stephen MacKinnon. He's part of a commemoration of Operation Husky. It's called Operation Husky 2013. I have to think in these commemorations, there's both the highs and the lows. I mean, some of the veterans will be welcomed into towns, and then, as you mentioned, when they call out the names, I mean, there's somebody there to answer that call.
There will be family members that will have traveled that lost their grandfather, let's say, 70 years ago, and that'll be a very tearful moment for each person. Also, when we're traveling through the countryside, we decided we wanted to honor the soldiers, so we've made soldiers' markers. We have 562 markers, and as we travel along, we plan to plant these markers along the streets and on the countryside to honor the soldiers in approximately the area they fell with the Canadian maple leaf on it. These markers were made by school children in Montreal and Sicily. And so it was our way of sort of developing a grassroots program. Not everybody can come over with us, but they could go on our website and sponsor a soldier, have their marker made with their name on it. We'll plan it, take a picture of it, and send it back. So there's going to be, as you said, highs and lows throughout this. It's going to be moments of, pause and reflection. I'm not a military guy. I've never served, but I'm sure thankful for those people and what they did to offer myself a life in Canada the way it is. My parents are Scottish. They emigrated here. I was able to go to school. I've got a nice job. I love Canada. And so when these moments go on, and I always get tear up when the bagpipes come on, of course, I know I'm going to be on a roller coaster along with the hundreds of others that will be with us.
Do we know how many veterans are still alive today from that campaign?
We're not exactly sure, but not a lot. If you now think about it, that's 70 years ago. The average age of a soldier might have been 20, so that puts them up in the 90 bracket. We have 2 traveling with us. They're both interesting characters. I hope to be as on the ball as they are at that age, and some of them have made this pilgrimage before, but not to the degree of what we're doing. They were frustrated veterans before, where there was nothing going on, nothing to commemorate that. So now there's a ground force with them, but not for fighting, but for celebration and cause and remembrance.
Is there a way to kind of to offer perspective, I guess, on the military importance of this campaign as it played toward the end of the war?
There's actually an interesting sort of side story to this of how it began, because there was a lot of deception that went on before we actually, the troops landed in Italy. There's a story called The Man Who Wasn't There, and I think they made a book about it where British intelligence fabricated this whole ghost story of this military attaché with you. So they found this derelict hobo, basically, preserved him, created a whole backstory, dressed him up in military outfit, and put fake documents in a case that was handcuffed to his hand, basically saying that the Allies had planned to land in Greece. So they threw him. The submarine came up near the shores of Spain. They threw him out overboard. Fishermen found him, and eventually it made its way to the German High Command, and they moved apparently 3 Panzer divisions over to Greece. So it sort of paved the way for us to get in and get a foothold and move forward. But what happened with that is, because that pressure came from the southern part of Europe, there had to be some redeployment of the Nazi forces in the rest of Europe. So I don't want to suggest for a second it made it any easier. It's softer, but now all of a sudden it was 2 fronts that they were fighting on, against the British and Americans, and we know what they had to do with the Russian group over on the east end of Europe. So I think it was all sort of like, if you think about it, just a coordinated effort to assure success to begin the liberation of Europe as a whole.
Steve, I hope you'll stay in touch when you're in Europe, because we'd love to hear more about how it all unfolds.
I'd be very happy to. My job here is communications. We have Facebook and LinkedIn and all the social media. We also plan to post our daily updates. So we know we're talking about what's happening on July 10th, 70 years ago, but then we're going to give a little posting of what we did on July 10th, 2013, and as we continue on. So we want everybody to sort of follow along on our journey as well. So those will be made available, and we really encourage people to share them, tell them with everybody. Our single goal here was just to create awareness, to let Canadians know about a story that's sort of been forgotten, and we have every reason to be proud of. And the little joke I like to say about it, if we don't stand up as Canadians to tell our own story, somebody like Ben Affleck's going to come along and change all the perspective of everything.
Good luck with it.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you. Stephen MacKinnon.
You can listen to John Moore live every weekday 5:30 to 9 on NewsTalk1010.com.
Time to say good morning to the guy who takes you home. John Tory is with us, host of The Live Drive. Hi there, John.
Morning, John.
Okay, so you know this fellow, Mr. Howard Levitt, who left behind his $200,000 car in the storm.
Well, this is a sensitive matter for some of us, I guess, these days. But if you ever get in trouble on the employment law front, he's your guy. He's a pit bull and a really smart, determined kind of lawyer. Now, I can't imagine owning a car that costs that much money to begin with, let alone leaving it in a pool of water. But if that's Howard Levitt's car, then he'll have an interesting story to tell as to the degree of his frustration that caused him to do that, because he's the kind of guy that would go nuts if he went into a big water pool in a flood with his expensive car.
Sounds like a pretty level-headed fellow, though. I mean, he finally said, listen, I had to get to a hearing. I have my clients, so, I've got insurance. I left the car behind, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles, or that's the way the Ferrari drowns.
No, that's exactly what Howard Levitt would do. I mean, so this doesn't surprise me at all. It's just one of those things where I can't contemplate buying the car, let alone leaving it in an underpass in a big puddle of water. But anyway, everybody's got to do their own thing. You
talked yesterday with Lisa Christensen, because a lot of people are wondering, first of all, if you go into water, what are the chances you're going to get out of it, but also what happens to your car after,